And we're live. It is Monday, January 10th, 2022, 5:05 p.m. Eastern Time. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Josh Marshall on the show to talk about, I hope, a lot of things from hose casings to old TPM TV videos to Dick Cheney. But I'm very happy that you joined at the very last minute. Thanks for doing that.
No problem.
I promise this will be better than constructing hose casings.
All right.
You're like a real suburban dad now with like out there. I mean,
yeah, I guess kind of. This is the thing where like you have a hose, but you have like a kind of a cart that you reel the hose in on is one of those. So I
know.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in the suburbs. This is like dad like, yeah. We like went through them. We like experimented with hose casings. Like there were many variations.
There you go.
Anyways, Scott, why don't you get us started? I mean, you actually, I think you have a much longer history of Talking Points memo than I do, actually, even though I worked there. But you were reading it before I was reading it.
Yeah, I was reading it when he's where Josh signed his name, Joshua Micah Marshall.
Yeah.
And I remember it was Howie Kurtz. That's how I knew about you, because Howard Kurtz. It's amazing. I think that anything good came from reading that. But he used to cut up these. It was like Playbook before Playbook, and then I read these what were turned out to be blog posts, and this was before 9/11. And it was before, actually, it was during maybe Bush versus Gore. Is when did you start writing during Bush versus Gore?
Yeah, I started literally about a week after the election proper, election day, and that was the. I probably would have done it otherwise, but that was sort of like the trigger. Right. That was the sort of the news crisis that led me to do it. And part of it was, that I was visiting my then girlfriend in New Haven. She was trying to reassemble the chronology of my life here. She was actually at Yale Law School. She was a student at Yale Law School. And so I was going there thinking this was after the election. Right. So I'm going to take a break and we're going to spend some time together. But obviously the election wasn't over. And that was sort of the trigger to start it.
This is like you had your PhD at this point, right? Or were you like?
I did not have my PhD. I was like kind of hanging ABD for basically for I don't know, ended up being a good at least 4 years, basically from about 1998 to about 2002, and that was when in 2002 TPM was growing, and it was kind of clearly becoming a thing. And I think if you've ever been someone who is in the process of doing a PhD, or maybe it's similar if you're writing a big book or something like that, you reach a certain point when you realize that the logic of time is about to turn against you. And that if you do not finish, it's going to get harder and harder. And it's never going to happen. So even though I was, trying to start a journalism career, I had started it. I wanted it to become successful. That I basically said, okay, I'm going to set things aside here. I need to get this done. And as it happened, the fall of 2002 turned out to be like a lot of news was going on, to put it mildly, in the fall of 2002 and into 2003. But I actually did. I got formally. I got my finished my PhD in the spring of 2003. But that was probably a good 5 years since I had really been,
Yeah.
really a graduate
Engaged in
student
it.
engaged in the scholarship. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
that makes sense.
So just getting back to this moment where I'm starting to read you, there are also other people who are doing things which are kind of similar. So like Mickey Kaus was doing like Kaus Files, and he wasn't insane then. Like
Right.
he was
David
like
House? Like, was it? Oh,
you
no, wait.
know that
Oh,
Mickey
no.
Kaus.
Kaus.
Yeah.
Mickey
Yep.
Kaus. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And he was doing Kaus Files at
Yep.
Slate.
Yep.
And but like we didn't like as a reader, I didn't know about this thing called blogs or like people who would become important voices. And then like I felt that like for me at least, TPM was extremely important as with the Bush years, where I personally, I'm just speaking for myself, I felt gaslit all the time, and like there was somebody who was like who was reasonable and extremely well informed and could write with passion about these things, and so it was really like I would refresh the thing maybe 37 times a day. I mean, I would just really care about.
He knows you like funded like the first like.
I was like, right. I was part of the first click fraud. So it was extremely important. And so this brings me to a question that came up yesterday amongst us. Oh, no, it wasn't yesterday. It was Friday when we were closing out. Ben Wittes said, "Would you have any problem appearing on the show?" We were talking about like January 6th, and then like the divide now is,
and how the chamber are the only people to show up in like the Republican side of the chamber, and yeah.
And so the thing was, like, Scott, would you have any problem going on the show, like having Dick Cheney and hosting the show with Dick Cheney? And I guess I felt like I don't think I could do that. And so I want to ask the Oracle, how should I feel about that?
Yeah, would you go on a show with Dick Cheney?
Yeah.
Josh?
Yeah, I totally would. I wouldn't give it a second thought. I mean, and some of that is just because I don't think that the situation the country's in is one that we can set standards for who we will allow to join us in a basic defense of the sort of the architecture of the republic.
So I just want to be clear. This is more of a personal, emotional reaction. Of course, I want all the allies we can get. So I'm not making the silly thing. I just mean like, could you see yourself?
Right. No, I understand exactly what you're saying. So we agree on that. I think one of the things that I have, and some of this is because I didn't actually start my journalism career in DC. I started it up in Boston, actually, or in Cambridge. But I got down there pretty quickly, and that's where I had been working for a couple of years when I started TPM. I mean, obviously didn't know Dick Cheney, right? But in the sense of, a lot of people who you really disagree with, and not just disagree with, people who do things that are bad, right? And some of that is you need to know those people as sources, and you just sort of, I don't know, you just and kind of, I guess, characterologically, this may seem surprising given how I kind of carry myself publicly. I generally get along with anybody in the sense of on an interpersonal level. Like if someone's not yelling at me, if we can kind of, just hello, blah, 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 blah. I don't, again, it may seem kind of strange. I don't like fighting, really, right? Kind of when someone says, hey, when you come on and debate me about, I don't want to do that, all that kind of stuff. But I don't. So in any case, just, I wouldn't have any problem at all. I don't, I don't know, that may be a failing.
Or it may be your profession also. Just like
It could,
just like lawyers represent people they don't agree with.
yeah, I think at some level it is. You just kind of you have to be able to talk to a lot of people, and you need to be able to kind of bracket things. I do think that it's also it's a funny thing because I the first 4 years or so I ran TPM. It was from DC, from like the beginning in late 2000 to mid late 2004, and I eventually moved to New York, basically because that's where my now wife lives. So there's
Millette
kind of
was
a
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
Millette was there exactly, and so most of the history of TPM has been from a remove from DC, and I always thought, even though again that wasn't why I did it, I think it was a great move for TPM because being at a distance
Mm,
from
mm,
DC is a really, I think, a very positive thing. But I started it being right there, and I think that being right there thing is it's a big plus and a big negative, and you can see it playing out with a lot of people in journalism and the world of commentary and stuff like that. Because on the one hand, if you have to see people, if you're going to bump into them,
This is so
that
true.
yeah, that just kind of makes you give a second thought to kind of, am I really going to say that one thing
mm.
now? And I think that can be very helpful in the sense of, you know what, I'm going to keep it within a certain level of fairness. I'm going to kind of pull back a certain level of hyperbole, because if I see that person, they're going to say, wait a second, that's not true. This isn't, they're going to call you on it. On the other hand, obviously, that can degenerate into you pull your punches because you want to avoid awkward encounters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that just goes both ways. That's a kind of a basic thing, and I don't think there's a right or I don't think one is necessarily better than the other, but it is a dynamic that everybody who writes about politics is operating within. And it's good to
Well,
have people on both, doing both things, because there's, again, it's there, just pluses and minuses on both sides of it.
I mean, I remember, I was coming out of non-journalism job at TPM. I had been like marginally in journalism beforehand. I was very young. I was like 22 or 23 when I started. And I will never forget watching the news cycle from inside TPM, which was like on the edge. HuffPo was on the rise. It was getting a link into Huffington Post meant your story went semi-viral, meant that you got clicks, meant that people were engaging reading it. That was like the goal. But there was also this informal network, and this is like a mix of kind of disgust but necessity, in which like I understand, and I know that this is still how it like kind of it works in a lot of ways, in which you would promote other journalists' work and other journalists would promote your work and other journalists would link to your work, and then there was this kind of like, I don't know, like buzz that you built around a story or around an idea, and then you would watch that idea go from like the blogs and like the kind of like, and it really was like a talking points memo, like it was a literal like it was like it went from like this wonky kind of take, and it would work its way up in like a day or two if the story was good enough that the New York Times would fucking rip us off, or like someone else would rip us off, and then Maddow would cover it, or someone, or like, or Oberman would cover it, like, and there was just kind of like, and then there was like, it was like, and then they take a screenshot of like the TPM headline if we were lucky, right? And then there was like, there'd be, and this was like the cycle, and I remember kind of just seeing both like the stories that were legitimately good work their way up that way, and seeing stories that were kind of overtly political and catty work their way up that way too. And it was kind of this like, for me it was like a little like, it was just kind of a mix of like, oh, this is how the sausage gets made. And it was I'm not trying to kind of like cast aspersions on any of it. It was just like this is all like, as you said, like there are just humans behind all of this stuff. And I do think that being in New York and covering DC was a blessing. Like it was a huge blessing. Like it allowed you so much more freedom and latitude. Especially if you had a couple of good sources who would just come to you after they left a bar in DC and like call you and tell you what the lowdown was. And then you didn't have any type of like, kind of like, well, I don't owe these people anything. I don't even know them. I'm just kind of like getting this like background. And now I have to go report it out and put all the pieces together. But I don't have any, like, that was the ideal, I would say, was like, you know, that kind of like arm's length.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a big plus. You know, we had at various points when we were knocking around kind of what our tagline would be. I think I think it was for what was once the TPM DC vertical. It was in it, but not of it, right?
Yes, I remember that.
And for me, I think it was a good combination of, I knew that place fairly well. I had lived there 5 or 6 years. And I kind of learned how to be a reporter basically down there, but I wasn't there then. And again, there's that plus and minus I spoke about before, but it's a certain freedom to kind of like, I don't want to run into you. You know, I don't want to kind of have an awkward conversation with you. I'm just going to say what I say and like, you know, whatever. But also, you know, from fairly early on, we usually did have people down there. So we were able to kind of have the best of both worlds. You know, something that's interesting is I was noticing from what you just said, and everything in the broad outlines is totally accurate, what you just said, and is accurate for when you worked at TPM. Yeah. But one thing I notice, and I do this too, is how we telescope the last 16, 17, 18 years. That I think Rachel Maddow didn't get a show until several years later. Rachel Maddow didn't have a show then. She was on panels. She was on panels like 2005-6 era.
Keith Olbermann had a show though, right? And didn't she sub for him regularly?
Correct. Yes, that was the trajectory. But I'm not saying that to bust your time. I'm saying that
no, you're right.
There's so much history that there's a lot, you know, we sort of compress the history, and certain things that happened later you know, we remember them all happening at the same time, and broadly speaking, it's accurate, but it's very funny. In running TPM, I've had the blessing of a ton of really talented people who worked at TPM, but I've had different people who worked on the sort of the business publishing side with me, and Andrew, and this is actually about Andrew, that in that period, there's a bunch of people who went on to become superstars that at various points, one of those people, in this case, Andrew, was saying, you know, this person's really, really talented. We should do something with them. And I, in most cases, knew we just didn't have the money. And not because, obviously, we wouldn't have the money to hire Rachel Maddow now, but this was when she was, I think she was
at Air America. Like they've been,
she was on Air America, but this was when Air America, but she wasn't a star on Air America. No. She was one person on Air America. And so anyway, that's just one thing about if you've been doing this long enough, you get to have said, oh, I don't know if I could have hired. I could have tried to hire this person who became very famous. But anyway.
No, I mean, I'm not wrong. She started in September 2008. They announced that she was getting her own show in September 2008. And so that was right before the Obama election. And that was, and so it did kind of overlap it. So I think that but you're right. Like it was definitely not Olbermann was the thing. There were like a few others. Like, I mean, it was definitely.
Yeah, he was the
kingmaker kind of thing. If he features something, your thing got 100,000.
Right. No, it's funny though too. I don't even remember. It'd be easy enough to find out when this was, but for reasons that were totally fortuitous, at least as far as I knew, I was actually on the last episode of that show.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
right, because it like got canceled very unceremoniously.
yeah, I
Maybe
don't know
rage
what.
quit over something, or like get
Oh,
accused of something, and like
I
I
don't.
can't even remember.
No, I don't think it was. I don't think it was something like that. I think that Oberman has a long history of feuding with everyone he's ever worked for, and usually getting fired or quitting, or that's just who Keith is,
Him.
and yeah, and not that that could be an admirable thing. I mean, who knows? So I think it was. I don't think anything happened per se. I just think it fell apart between him and the executives at MSNBC. So this was just some kind of random evening that I went over there, did the show, and it's funny. I noticed like, oh, there's some suits kind of in the studio that night, like kind of sitting off camera. Obviously, didn't think about it, and I'm what was it like? Either I was driving home or I get home and everybody's like freaking out because like at the end of that episode he said, and this is my last show ever. And I'm like, what the fuck, right?
That's pretty great, actually.
Yeah, we're all dancing around it, so I might as well just ask it. So when or how do I get my own show?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
Good question.
Do I have to
after a long time?
Yeah. Do I have to go on a panel first, as you suggest, or can I?
That usually is the trajectory.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the
tip. People
Okay.
go on a panel, and then they kind of like whether it's I don't know if they have if they have an agenda to get their own show, but that's usually
so.
Okay. But again,
it's a comorbidity of getting your own show. Or what is it with that thing where it's a contributor, I guess, to it,
I mean, so I never, unlike you, Scott, I never wanted to do this. Ben roped me into this. I thought it was going to be like 2 weeks. And as proof that I never wanted to do this, I'd like to present this hostage video from TBM TV from 2008. I think I'm 23 years old in this video. And I'm talking, my beat was, as Josh will remember, one of my beats was Alaska, and Ted Stevens, who was at that point being investigated by the DOJ in a trial I would go on to cover that I will like literally never forget because it was one of the most insane trials. I mean, someone should write a book about it because it's kind of, or like do a movie. Like, do you remember the FBI agents had an affair with each other? One of the jurors, like,
that's sort of like that's a recurrent theme.
Yes, and then like Emmett Sullivan,
FBI horn dog, like setting up investigation.
Oh God! But then like the judge, like, do you remember the juror who was like, "Oh, I'm really sorry, my mother died. I have to leave." And Judge Emmett, I'll never forget his name, like was like, "Sure." In this like extreme situation, we'll put in like another juror, and actually the juror went to bed on like the Kentucky Derby and was like lost all this money at the Kentucky Derby and became like when you don't remember that when
I remember the other stuff. I didn't remember the Kentucky Derby.
There was a giant copper statue of a salmon fish that was like in like Ted's home. There were just like I mean I just like had
it was. I just went
through a lot of documents, so I remember it's like the curse of doc review.
It was a very primary colors kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes. But I'm going to share this. Hold on. Let's see if I can like get it to play. It's a little, this was, I would say,
oh my goodness, look at you.
Yes. Hold on, I know.
Awesome.
Hold on, I had like makeup on and stuff. Don't tell anyone. Hi, this is Kate Klonick for TPM Media. It's Tuesday, August 5th. 2008. What you saw right there was a motorcycle convoy that brought Senator Ted Stevens to a rally at his campaign headquarters yesterday morning.
We're with you, Ted. I'm glad to see all you guys are bikers. When people see the bikers, they know that there's some real force present. So. Number 5.
As you saw, Senator Stevens described, the rally was meant as a show of force to his supporters as he continues to run for re-election in the face of his indictment. Now, some of you might wonder why Stevens is continuing to fight for his political life at 84 years old and with almost 40 years in the Senate. Well, Stevens had something to say about that.
After a lifetime of work, some people ask me, why should you run for re-election? The short and simple answer is, my mission for Alaska is not complete yet.
Anyway, he would go. I mean, there was my I was trying to. I remember also that it took me 16 takes to get the date right.
There's actually there's a TPM TV blooper reel.
I think
on either our channel or. I think it's up somewhere, but yeah, no, I remember that stuff. I'll tell you, this is actually an example why we had that show, which we did for a little more than 2 years in like 2007, 2008, in that range. What I am good at is not so much the writing stuff, but a kind of scrappiness about building the company that runs TPM. And actually the story with that show is that, at various points there'd be this opportunity or that opportunity, and I could sort of claw the company up a bit. And there was a
I am so glad that you're mentioning this, because I cut it off, but there was a bit at the beginning that it was like a partnership with, what was it called? Something like it was some type of video blogging thing.
It was a company called Next New Networks, and they had channels. I mean, this was and everything was much more primitive. They had a channel called Veracifier, which was their kind of politics channel. And I had a couple years before, I'd gotten very into what we now just call clips, right? The things that Aaron does on Twitter. And I remember at some point, this was kind of right around the time when YouTube was becoming a thing. And I remember I did all this stuff to try to figure out what the tech would be to just not do YouTube, but actually publish the videos yourself. In any case, I've been doing that. And then I started talking to these guys, Next New Networks, which was, one of a million VC-backed operations that were kind of in the early, when there was Rocket Boom and, who's going to do viral video and all that kind of stuff.
There were a bunch of people, there was what was that woman's name? The really attractive woman that was
Congdon.
Was it Rocket Boom? Was it?
Yeah, it was, I think Congdon was her last, Amanda Congdon?
Or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
So a bunch of companies that wanted to kind of get in on that and had a lot of VC money. And so I struck a deal with them that we would produce this show, which was like a daily, 4 or 5 minute show, kind of like that, and 4 days a week, which I'll tell you is fucking labor intensive, really labor intensive.
Oh, you don't say.
It was like half my day basically, coming up with stories and stuff like that. But in any case, the contract was we would get $15,000 a month for that. And at the time, that was like a third of the budget of the whole company. So that chunk of money allowed me to kind of really jump at to sort of the next level. And we did that for a couple years. And the big thing about video is, and why I've always been very video averse, is that it is basically impossible to get people to watch video at the level at which it is, a profitable venture.
Yes.
And so if you are needing to get people to read that, to watch to the end, man, it is just like being Sisyphus if you're 10 other Sisyphi are behind you and you're pulling them up too. It's impossible, right? And but in this case, that wasn't our problem. We try to get it high as possible, but it was not. But you were getting $15,000 a month regardless, right? And so that
which
was
is what he put me Yeah, now I get it.
You know, it was and you know, they I think they sold 2 or 3 ads the whole 2-year period, but they also like cashed out and sold themselves to YouTube. So I'm sure they made out like bandits. But 15 grand a month for 2 years was a huge. I mean, it would be a huge amount of money for any of us, but I'm saying a huge amount of money in context of running a company.
Yeah, that explains also why you were very, as I recall, very pessimistic about Facebook's pivot to video, saying this is just not going to work. You had done it many years earlier and saw how difficult it was.
That was definitely. I mean, there were other reasons that fed into my pessimism, but one of them was, it's really hard to get people to watch video, and it made me skeptical of the numbers. Because just to remind everybody, what happened here is, you know, I was not the only one who realized that it's really hard to get people to watch video. And then I don't remember exactly when it was, I think in the 12, 13, 14 era.
Unless you're a toddler, and then toddlers will watch videos forever.
Yeah, exactly. Well, now with like TikTok, kind of everybody constantly watches video, but that's a different thing than watching video in the way that we're describing. So I knew it was really hard. Facebook, and then again, at some point, I don't remember exactly what year it was, Facebook came out with like these new numbers, like, wow, they've cracked it. They are getting people to watch the video. And like internally at TPM, we were kind of proposing, we're going to do this, we're going to get this for video, because again, if you're involved in the advertising part of digital publishing, you get the RFPs. Where's the video? What video do you have that you're going to, and it was like, well, we have where the view, all blah, 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 blah. It's really, really hard. And so they came out and they had these numbers like, wow, they've cracked it. And that shifted everybody in digital publishing, either to that if they can crack it, we can crack it. Or if they can crack it, we will produce video and we'll put it on Facebook and all these kind of things. And so it's still a little murky. Basically, they fake the numbers. Or yes. I guess to be really precise, maybe the numbers were unintentionally false, and then they didn't mention it for a couple of years, right? But the point is, they have such heft that they were able to kind of steer the whole market in a totally different direction. And obviously, digital journalism had all sorts of underlying weaknesses that were not Facebook, but basically they got tons of people to make big bets that in a lot of cases destroyed companies, right? Or destroyed companies through a mix of stupidity and greed and whatever. But yes, the fact that I had tried early on when the market wasn't glutted to get people to watch video, that it is like, man, I was like, no way, man, it is. I've been there. I'm not doing that again.
But this was a great business move. The $15K a month regular. I mean, that's just like it's a smart contract. Like it's like a smart, it's a good deal. Like there's nothing,
I mean, this is when we went into that contract, probably the whole revenue for the company was maybe 30.
Yeah.
Right. So like big money. And it was it allows us, I mean, honestly, probably allowed us to hire you.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And then I think that like after 2008, there was a huge like belt tightening after the election. There was a huge belt tightening because there was a real concern. I think I remember this very distinctly, which was like, yay, Obama's been elected. What the fuck is going to happen to all of this kind of like literally participatory democracy media like that has developed in the 2 terms of Bush that has like, what is going to happen with it? Is it an actual change in infrastructure? Is it an actual change in the informational ecosystem? Is it like a real systemic change? Or is it going to be like a fad that was basically brought about just because people were outraged about it? Well, it turns out it was not a fad, obviously, but I think that we were we were
But there was a bit. There was a big.
There was a worry.
Well, not just worry. There was a whole. There was a lot of that, and there was. I know that. I mean, at that time, I think that I knew that contract was ending before the election. But it was also when I was, for the first and what turned out to be intentionally the only time, raising money for the company, and that sort of was one thing we had going on at that, in that kind of transition period. But I do remember pretty clearly in 2009, it took us 7 or 8 months to get our kind of legs about us editorially, because we had this idea like, okay, kind of Democrats are in charge and they're going to be in charge for decades now, and we're going to sort of chronicle that story and everything, and it might have been good for the country if that was the story, but it left us kind of not exactly sure what our role was.
Right.
I think history took care of that.
No, right, because fortunately, like, the world fell apart. I mean, you had like you had the global financial crisis, you had the Tea Party revival, you had the kind of the beginnings of kind of Trumpy.
Sorry, we're asking. Genevieve is one of our co-hosts, and she's a former law student of mine, and she's amazing. But she's also a co-host on In Lieu of Fun, and she has a question. But we're inviting questions on, or people on, just to ask you questions. So just keep going on. But yeah,
cool.
Sorry, Scott, what were you saying?
No, I was just going to say that it is funny to think that 2008 would be the end of history for the liberals.
Well, it's funny because when in the period I'm talking about, the crisis was already happening, right? The financial crisis was a thing, and if anything, that seemed like to as a it fed into a narrative about a long-term, kind of democratic ascendancy. And but it was, the funny thing was, though, that what really clicked to me was something that was happening in the summer of 2009, which was these kind of feral pre-Trumpers, Tea Partiers showing up at these town halls to rant about Obamacare. And it seemed like, and it was in many ways kind of, was organized by the various kind of, Republican pressure groups and stuff like that. But that was the thing. And it's not just, I mean, in a sense, it presaged a lot of stuff that we know about, subsequently over the last dozen years or so. But that was a thing that I was kind of like, okay, there's the thread. This is where we are. That's a thing, right? And so it was that in kind of, I think it was July, August of 2009, where I just had a sense of like, okay, I get where we are. Whereas I think in a lot of ways, for the first 6 months or so, editorially, I didn't quite get where we were.
Right.
I mean, I would say that it was just like an insane learning curve. Like, you had started as just blogging, and then it was like, okay, well, is this the opportunity? Like, maybe I don't need to get hired by someone. Maybe this is like my Substack moment, to put it in modern terms. It's basically what it is. And then like you develop it into an entire media company. Like, but that, it's very funny, as you say, to telescope everything that's happened in the last 22 years. But like, honest to God, Josh, you like built it from the literal ground up. And it's an amazing story, I think. And I also think, like, I'm looking at kind of, I'm hoping to have Ben Smith on soon. I think you guys were like talking with each other. Like, I think the last time, like, he was still at,
BuzzFeed.
BuzzFeed.
Yeah, BuzzFeed. When you were like at that content moderation conference and you guys both talked, and like you guys were kind of like,
I forgot about that.
Yeah, and it was great.
Totally,
and it was you and Ben, but like, I'm really interested in like what the hell Ben's doing and the 200 million English language people that he is like the market that he is like sussed out. But I mean, I just think that generally
the thing he's not saying is 200 million English speaking people online is not a thing. 200 million English speakers who are very affluent and are considered an influential audience. That's money.
Yes.
for what he's building.
Well, do you think that it's
I'm not saying that is my prescription of value, but for the people who will fund his operation, that is the prescription of value.
Well, that's kind of an interesting point, because I was kind of wondering, and not to get like too like in the weeds about this for a second in like the media world, but I am kind of curious. Like, he launched this media company, and or he's launching it, and it kind of hits me that like, isn't he like, he like caters to an audience of people that like are very cosmopolitan and that fly from like one place to like Hong Kong is to like Marrakesh as like, not really Marrakesh because no one goes to Marrakesh, but you know what I mean? Like, there's just kind of like this general kind of like, I'm just comfortable in any urban environment and can like, and there is like that there like, but that is very different from like the way that he, like, saying 200 English speakers makes it sound like you're catering to an ESL audience, which I don't think is like what is like going on.
Yeah, well, I guess what he said was 200 million college educated English speakers online. And college educated is a major kind of caveat, or sort of part of the Venn diagram. College education is also used as a proxy in the advertising world for a certain kind of outlook and a certain level of affluence, even though obviously
a certain average revenue per user.
Yes. And I think the key there is, there are tons of English speakers in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Australia, Canada, some in South Africa, a whole huge number of second language but de facto language of business people in East Asia, whole countries where, because of the multilingualism of the country, English is the lingua franca, blah, 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 blah. But the key there is that to have a news organization, you have to have some kind of common experience, some kind of common narrative about what matters in the world, right? I mean, and that's a major qualifier, right? Because I mean, what's the news? Well, the news is fairly different on the ground in South Africa and in among elites in Kenya and stuff like that. So you're looking at I think, in effect, looking at a certain kind of cosmopolitan, educated, affluent, global elite that largely speaks English, speaks within that world, and that has to be what they are going for, because again, that's where you get the money to run that kind of operation.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I don't know.
No, those are both really smart guys, and they come at both Justin and him. They both have really good experience for that kind of operation, coming from kind of two different angles on it. So they're those guys are both really smart. So I would not be surprised if they're successful at it.
I mean, it also doesn't. It strikes me as they're smart, but they're also not lazy, and so they would have researched this fairly decently. So yeah.
Yeah, and they've got a lot of good. They've got. I mean, they have, both of them have things that I would disagree with them on, but I know a lot about how this industry works, and both of them do too.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it's a really well poised venture. Let's put it that way. Hi, GDF. How you doing? You're in the dark.
I know. I'm too lazy to go turn the light on.
It's okay.
I started in the light, and now I'm in the dark, much like democracy these days. So I'm going to be kind of switching gears with my question. Thanks for taking it. Regarding McCarthy's statements about stripping Democrats of their committee appointments, we consistently see Republican officials co-opting punitive actions taken by Democrats to further consolidate their political power. What can be done other than naming the bad behavior to prevent abusive rule by a minority, and does history give us any examples we should learn from?
That's a great question. Yeah.
That's a really good question. I don't know if there is any obvious thing that you can do to stop this kind of stuff. As you say, the real Republican model here is just to punch back, and separating the punching back from even a notional connection to any kind of precipitating event. There has been this thing where 2 or 3 different Republican members of the House have been stripped of their committee assignments. It's been in response to things that are pretty clearly that would have been at any point in the last century seen as beyond the pale, blah 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 blah. And so what they're talking about is, look, we come back in power, we're gonna take the half a dozen Democrats most pilloried on Fox News, and we're going to strip them of their because payback, because that's all. It's everything in Republican politics is tribalism and strike back. I mean, you saw it with Trump, the whole investigating the investigators and all that kind of stuff. I think the only thing you can really do is build political power by winning elections. And that's obvious, but it's not always obvious to people. There are not necessarily, there's a lot of talk in our politics today about coming up with ingenious structural fixes, or whether it's the courts, or whether it's a new this or a new that, or you're gonna do whatever. You really have to win elections and start building political power and consolidating political power and do things with it. Political power is the fundamental thing, and most things, to kind of use the antiquated terminology, are just epiphenomena of political power. So I don't, we should definitely have the For the People Act. We should definitely do everything we can before the courts, but those are really not going to hold up against consolidated political power. So you need to build political power. You need to, if it's all you have, consolidate defensive political power. And I suspect if things go poorly over the next half dozen years, that's going to be really a big thing, is consolidating defensive political power in blue states, basically. I think winning elections, consolidating political power where you can, and making sure that you get the frightening information about the opposition out in front of the public in a compelling way. Because if doing that can't move people, can't have an effect on the political dynamics of the country, then maybe it doesn't matter that much.
It's like a little dark. I don't know. Sorry, go ahead, Scott. I have thoughts, but we also have a bunch of questions, but go ahead.
I just, I do, because this feels like a Yoda moment where I get to ask Yoda the question. But
that's not a reference to my looks.
Yes,
no. It's to wisdom.
Yeah.
But before that, I just mentioned that, like, as a TPM viewer, I just want to say that like the fact that Trump pardoned Randy Duke Cunningham just feels like the ultimate insult.
We used to have the Duke Awards, didn't you?
No, right, exactly.
Yeah.
This guy was the symbol of
corruption.
of corruption, and of course he gets pardoned. I mean, it's almost too perfect. I mean, you reminded me that when you Kate, when you brought up the Ted Stevens and Randy Duke Cunningham were like the two just kind of
You
amazing.
can't even joke about that shit anymore though, because it doesn't even matter. It's just like not even
Yeah, right.
funny. Like
Right,
it's just
like Matt, like how do you compare that to like Matt Getz or something? But anyway, here's the Yoda question. Okay, is there an optimistic scenario for 2014, or
2014.
I'm sorry, 2024. Excuse me. I'm sorry, 2024.
I
That
was
is
like terrified. I'm like,
you know, because I'm still from talking to you, I was still in the Bush era.
I know.
So,
Yes,
so
I
I
know.
was projecting forward. But in the very methodical way in which lower level electoral officials are being replaced by Stop the Stealers and Trumpers. I mean, it's I find it hard to see like how one shouldn't be completely pessimistic. So I guess the question is, should one be completely pessimistic?
I mean, I'm not at all about 2024. I'm kind of guardedly pessimistic about 2022 because it's just a very difficult
Right.
election for the Democrats. I do think that, there is a dynamic that we have seen repeatedly in recent decades where sometimes the best thing that can happen to an incumbent president is to lose control of Congress during the first midterm election of the presidency, because that gives them something to play off against. Because as long as it's them and unified control of government, everything is a referendum on them, right? And that is in many ways what Joe Biden is dealing with right now. It's just him, right? It's the chaos of the whole world, all of which is at his doorstep. This happened. Why didn't you stop it? That happened. Why didn't you stop it? It's kind of tough because the world is not in a great place, right? And that's not saying he couldn't be doing a better job, but I mean, it is structurally a difficult place to be. We saw it with Clinton, we saw it with Obama. You lose the Congress, and then you're kind of like, there's someone else. It's not just me versus a hypothetical, perfect president. It's me versus these other guys. So I think that in many ways, it could. I think it is more likely than not that a not great outcome in 2022 helps you have a better outcome in 2024. On the question of like, are we going to have a real presidential election in 2024? Look, I see all the same things everybody else does. Let's put it this way. It's going to be quite difficult to take a decisive win and state legislatures just say, no, we're going to have the other guy be president. I'm not saying it can't happen. They're laying the groundwork to make it happen. It will not be easy to do that. And I think the real scenario is one in which, if it's close, that's a real problem, because you have the skids greased to take something that is close, that puts real substantive decisions into the discretionary authority of the of the big lie types, and that's real bad. So I still think what it comes down to is you can't let it be close. Now, I'm not saying something bad can happen. It absolutely can. And you find yourself in that position if Joe Biden runs and he is reelected and 3 or 4 Republican state legislatures just send different electors to Congress, then you're in a kind of an existential crisis situation where, what are you going to do? Found an army and go, what do you do at that point? Because, for the reasons we all know, I'm just saying that I don't see it as I see it as a very real danger. I do not by any means see it as, what's the point? We're not gonna, we're not gonna
Yeah,
have a
it's
real
not.
election.
What you're saying is you're not saying it's inevitable, but you're not saying it's not close enough for great discomfort.
I think it is. I think it is as, probably as great a danger for a breakdown of the Republican order that, it's sort of a question of what you want to call the Civil War. It's a different set of, U.S. Civil War, different set of circumstances. The danger is great. It is very grave. And again, I think it really comes into effect if you've got a close call where, discretionary, the notionally lawful use of discretionary power by bad actors can make the difference. So yes, it's really bad. I do not think by any means that it is inevitable and we're not going to have a real presidential election. I think it is going to be a very dangerous one. And I think there's a really good chance that if it is close, it could be stolen. And it's really important that it not be close. Unfortunately, we are in a period where every election is close, right? We don't have decisive presidential elections. So it is suboptimal, to put it mildly.
I'm just thinking of, so I'm going to bring Andy on. But I was just thinking about how the chart that's been going around of Republicans after January 6th, estimation of Trump and McConnell, and just like the straight line, like no real like change, and then like McConnell. I mean, like it's just a very interesting question about like how we hold more periodic elections accountable than an executive branch in some type of way, even though they're not. Andy, it's so great to see you. It's been a while. Great question. Switching gears a little bit to something a little bit more funny, hopefully.
So I loved your story about Ted Cruz. I guess you were a few years ahead of him in college. Is that?
I think 1 year ahead of him in college.
Right.
1 year.
So
1 year ahead of him.
What was your favorite, best, worst, wildest story you heard while researching him about what he was like in college? And were there any great anecdotes that did not make the article? And what do you think of Tim Miller's theory that Ted Cruz has a humiliation fetish?
So Josh, do you want to be sued for defamation?
That's just sort of in for a dime and for a dollar at this point. I don't think there was anything. I mean, there were probably things I left out because I didn't have permission to share them. So I was a year older than Ted in college, and my wife was actually his year in college. And she went on actually to go to law school at the same place at the same time with him. So she was actually
she was she was at Harvard with him. So
she was in school with him for 7 years. And so the funny thing is when Ted Cruz was elected to the Senate, I totally didn't remember him. And when I was and so at the college I went to, there were residential colleges. So it wasn't just I went to the same university. I was in the same kind of, 300, 400, 500 sub college.
Closed.
Like
garden,
little, kind of group of dorms or something like that. And I have an extremely good memory. Like I just like if we ran into each other, or knew each other 25 years ago, you probably don't remember me, but I remember you, right? And so when people brought up Ted Cruz, I was never, and people show me pictures, I'm like, yeah, I kind of remember that guy, right? But kind of in that way that which, like, maybe you remember him, maybe you're just kind of creating a fictitious recollection or something like that. And the funny thing is that Dave Patton, who's this guy who's like his best friend in college and went with him through law school, I knew him really well. Great guy. Bizarrely, he's a really sweet guy, right? I know him.
And you never met Ted Cruz?
For whatever reason, and I knew everyone who knew him. I knew everybody. And Millette, my
I
wife,
kind of
knew him.
respect you very much for admitting that you didn't know him.
I
Like it would
just-
be easy to confabulate, like, or
I-
to be a
Yeah, I
fabulous.
tried.
and
I
like
tried.
make-
I really tried, but I just did not remember him. So I went back and I just talked to everybody. Like, do you remember this guy? You know, do you remember this guy, Ted Cruz? Blah, 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 blah. And when I did, everyone, it was so strange because, again, this was someone who I was in very close proximity to. And somehow I just had, and I remember everyone else in college. I remember them. Everyone I've ever met, I remember. Don't remember this guy. And so when I was talking, I asked people this. It's like, you know, what is your recollection of Ted Cruz? Well, oh, complete asshole. Total. I mean, just consistently, everybody like, oh, total douchebag. And all the stuff, and also when I got beyond like where I went to college, to people who like he was very big into college debate, and I want to tread carefully here because I know there is a strong comorbidity between the college debate circuit and people who go on to be
and trolls.
to excel. No, well, maybe that too. To excel in the academic legal academy, right? In academic law. In any case, when I talk to people,
not me.
Okay, but a lot of you guys,
it was much more civilized.
I've always been a loser. Yeah.
But a lot of people who are in that world were, in any case, and he was like a big player in that world, was like, you know, and in any case, just at every step, no one except this David Patton guy, who again is a really nice guy. I knew this guy, right? Sweetest guy in the world. I have no idea what kind of like hocus pocus Ted put on him to make him be his best friend. But that was the thing. I mean, you know, smarmy, you know, kind of the kind. I mean, I'm going to get myself in trouble here. Let's just say smarmy. And
yeah,
the kind
yeah,
of
yeah. We get it.
And in addition to everything, yeah, I mean, and after I had heard all these things, I kind of remembered. I kind of looked at the picture like, okay, yeah, I kind of remember that guy. But again, this is like repressed memory stuff, right? It was quite possible that I'm just like I've been stewing and everybody telling me how terrible he was. But in any case, I did not remember him. And again, my wife totally did. You know, oh, asshole, total asshole.
What about the point? What about the humiliation fetish theory?
You know, I guess it's a decent theory because he is a man at war with his own dignity, right? Yeah. So that would kind of fit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just like every.
Like, I mean, I feel like this is like, do you remember, what's the North Carolina governor who like went on the Appalachian Trail?
Oh, it was,
yes.
Right. Like, I mean, like,
wait, South Carolina.
I mean,
South Carolina.
And like, and we don't talk about him anymore, but John Edwards and like,
Mark,
I mean, like, there's just so many stories of, I guess, like, men at war with their own dignity could literally be half of the politics of like all of the U.S.
Well, it's true. Although you know, the funny thing is, like, someone like John Edwards, after that hit, he just disappeared.
He did.
He disappeared, right? And so that's one thing. But you have and God, what is Sanford?
Mark Sanford. Yeah,
Mark Sanford. Right. He had a whole comeback. You know, he had to kind of take a few. Go to the minors for a few seasons, but he came back in the House of Representatives, right?
Joined the circus.
Wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, what was it? Was he in the House and then he became governor? Because he was in D.C. He was in D.C. Then he became governor, and I think he came back in the House, and strangely, he was one of those people that Trump put out of business.
Yeah, he was a never Trumper.
That's the funny thing, though, because that was in the Trump era. You have a certain very small subset of Republicans, of people who would not, you know, do the bending of the knee to Trump, right? And Corker in Tennessee, and in most cases, it was not much heterodoxy. It was just not the absolute fealty. And ironically, Sanford was one of those guys. So there was a kind of a certain amount of dignity recovery there. I mean, Trump ended his political career, but that's a fairly dignified way to be run out of politics.
Either that or just like the dignity bar has fallen so low that Mark Sanford didn't clear it before, but Ray clears it now.
I wanted to say, like, I think that Mark Sanford's, like, unlike John Edwards cheating on tyrant wife,
right,
dying of cancer, like, there was a little bit of a difference. Like, he just kind of like had an affair, and there was like this thing, and so there's like, you don't want to like
disappeared.
Well,
yes, he did disappear, but like
I will say this: I always had a certain grudging respect for him because the standard thing,
I do too.
the standard thing in that case, I mean. He runs off to Argentina because he's so in love with this woman, right? Now, obviously, you shouldn't fall in love with people who aren't your spouse, but he did, and he's down in Argentina because he has, he has to see her. And then the standard thing to do there is you have a press conference, you say, I made a terrible mistake. I'm gonna fix things with my family and blah, 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 blah. And he didn't. And he was like, you know what? I love this woman. And I did it, and I just love this woman. And I'm kind of like, okay, dude, that is a more dignified way. It is a less successful, but it is a more dignified way to say, you got me. What can I say? I'm in love.
I feel like we should rewrite his legacy, maybe. I feel like maybe we should make a musical, like hire Lin-Manuel.
I will say that unfortunately, Sanford had and continues to have really egregious politics.
Yeah, I
know. but yeah, I mean, like, again, people, I always had a grudging respect for his besottedness and unwillingness to lie in the way that politicians have learned you need to lie when you get caught in something like that.
Totally. I completely agree. I mean, I look to like the the Weiner documentary is the best about this. Like, it just is like art. Tom McGuckin, you tag me and Josh and Jed and in all the time, and I never get to respond to you because I'm always like, I don't know what he's talking about, so I'm just going to I don't have time to dig into it. But go ahead, ask your question. Okay. Last word. All right, friend.
Aren't I supposed to give the last word?
You're wonderful. Yeah. Give the last word.
Okay, Josh, you, Kate, Scott, and Ben are the people that I really listen to. I communicate with you all the time. But at any rate, Josh promised me that he would get, he had a thing in DC about 4 years ago. I actually paid to go out there. I want you guys to come out west. I don't care where it is. And I'll get Kate and Scott and Ben to come out, and you guys can all put out something, but you just need a little bit of a Western sort of vent to your deal. And that's the last word I have in lieu of fun, but I didn't get the soliloquy right, but that's what I'm saying.
You know what? I completely agree. And actually, in part of our plan in 2020 was that we were going to hold at least 2 in-person events off the East Coast. And just for people who aren't familiar with TPM, it's not that we have some kind of elitism about the East Coast. That's where we live, right? I mean, we're located in New York and DC. So obviously to get, to leave the East Coast is just in terms of planning and stuff is much more difficult than to do it in DC and New York. But for exactly the reason you say, that was our plan. And then obviously COVID happened and we have,
you should do it in Santa Fe and Missoula. It would be 2 great.
Well, I guess there we could do it with, we could, it's, you have a low population per square mile there. So we could, kind of do it COVID safe. No one come into this quadrant without taking an antigen test. In any case,
Denver would be not a bad place.
Denver's not
has-
bad either.
Denver
Yeah.
makes sense, or like Austin makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of places, and I totally agree. And again, it's just been it's COVID, right? Even just to give you an example, you know, we've been remote since the beginning of the pandemic, and we were going to be back to, you know, part-time in person in our New York office in last September. And then Delta happened, right? And then we kind of said, okay, we're going to put a pause on this. And you know, kind of here we are. So as soon as COVID's over, right, we are going to do that. And I say that tongue in cheek, but I really mean it. It's just because of the chaos of the last 2 years, kind of adding to the fact that as a small organization, it's difficult to organize stuff not in our home territory, just with all the logistics and stuff like that. But yes, as soon as things calm down enough, we are going to do that, and we think it is important. And I mean, look, I was born in Missouri and I was raised in California. I'm not, you know, I get that there's a whole other country out there. So yeah, we're going to do it.
I love that. So we are going to leave it there. Thank you for spending so much time with us. This was amazing. I could have spent another hour. Actually, we could have gotten way more in the weeds in a bunch of those things. And I pulled myself back. But this was so wonderful. And, man, I can't wait to hopefully see you again in person soon.
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
yeah. And Scott, we are not allowed to have fun anymore.
But we do get to meet one of our heroes. Thank you, Josh, for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I really mean it. You got me through the Bush administration. I really mean it. I'm not even joking.
Well, ditto. You know, my relationship with TPM and the TPM audience did for me. You know, it's a very deep thing. I'll tell you, the night of the 2004 election, which I thought Kerry was going to win. I did not think it was by any means a sure thing. I thought 52%, 48% likelihood. And I remember that night when it became clear to me he had lost. And I spent that night and into the next morning, in this kind of comatose, sort of depressive catatonic state in bed. And part of it is that I felt like, man, I had sort of led a lot of people to think this it was going to work out. And I needed to kind of explain what the next step was. And that was both very daunting, but my feeling that I needed to do that also kind of propelled me forward. Right. Cause there's still, after the flood, you still have stuff to do. Right. So, and the most stuff the audience helped me manage that.
Yeah, well, yeah. I do. I remember that, and I would just say to people out in the Greek chorus, I subscrib to TPM. You should subscribe to TPM.
Subscribe.
Yeah, everybody subscribe.
This is so great, and we'll put a link on Twitter and everything else. But this was amazing. It never hit me until this moment that this show started at a similar moment, which was that it started with Ben starting it during that 1 week period. He literally just tweeted at me and was start a live show with me, and now we're 582 episodes in, almost every day for the entire pandemic. And it's not dissimilar. We're not trying to build a media company. I think I just would like to stay alive for and teaching my classes for a few more years. But I do think that there is it's funny that you kind of, all of this is it's made me kind of think a lot about what this show is too, as you kind of are talking about this, and what new media is, and what the engagement in video is. It's just so incredibly different. So Josh, this is amazing. You're the best.
Well, thanks for having me.
Good luck with the hose case.
All right. I finished it before I came on. I was rushing, but I finally
figured.
got
I
it done.